sharing the stories of the foster care community. This is the Forgotten Podcast.
Hey, it's Jamie Cabe. Welcome back to the Forgotten Podcast, where we are sharing the stories of the foster care community. With every episode, our goal is to learn from children, parents, and workers in foster care so that we can all grow in our awareness and be encouraged to support this community right where we live. In fact, if you are interested in being part of supporting the foster care community, starting next month, May 2023, applications to become a TFI advocate are open. Now, this only happens twice a year, and there are only a few spots available. So if you want to encourage your local foster care agencies and help churches become more aware of foster care, then you should apply. It's completely free, and we are here to help you along the way. You can learn more and sign up to be notified when applications go live at tfiadvocate.org. Now, if you enjoy this podcast, be sure to leave a review, subscribe, and share it with a friend. Thank you for listening and engaging with us. Okay, it's time. Let's do it. Melissa Smallwood found herself in the foster care system as a teenager, and it had a large impact on her life. She is now a wife and a mom of 7, which I am too.
Oh, cool.
I love that. Several of which joined your family through adoption and foster care, and Mimi to 5.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah,
okay.
My favorite thing.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh. Through this journey, she also pursued a career as a therapist and now works with mainly children and teens who have been in or are in the foster care system. Welcome to the show, Melissa.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so happy to have you. I really appreciate your willingness to share your story because that will help us better understand what it's like to be a child in foster care. Mm-hmm. And that's a huge thing. We want to bring light to this. We want to help people see and understand so that we're able to help, right? And come alongside. So will you take us back to that day that you first entered care? What do you remember about that day? What were some of the circumstances surrounding that day?
That was a chaotic day. I had talked to a counselor a few days prior about some things that were going on in my home, not knowing that would set off a chain of events that would change our family. And so I just remember I attended a small private school at the time, and I just remember a stranger coming and telling me that I wouldn't be going back home. I didn't get to take anything. I didn't have any belongings with me other than my school backpack. And I was taken that first night to a group home. I had led a very sheltered life up until that point. I was mainly homeschooled for most of my life, so I hadn't ever been around a bunch of girls my age, let alone girls that didn't lead sheltered lives. So the group home setting was quite a shock to my system, for sure.
Wow. And how old were you at this point?
I think I was 12. Wow. I was in 7th grade. Yeah.
Man, that's my son's age. One of my sons, he is in 7th grade. So Melissa, did you have siblings? Were you the only one?
I did. I had 2 little brothers. One was 2.5 years younger than me. One was 5 years younger than me. And that was the most traumatic part of foster care for me, was that I never lived with my brothers again.
That is so hard. I am so sorry. And I appreciate you sharing. I just want to acknowledge that I as much as I can understand, you being willing to share is not easy, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, this just takes a toll on you to go back there to relive some of these things. So I just want to thank you again for that, because I know that's significant.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. So you experienced foster care much later, not much later. Sometimes kids are taken to foster care as babies, sometimes very young. You were not, you were a teenager or almost, right? Mm-hmm. And so talk about that transition from not being in care? And what did you know about foster care at that point to all of a sudden now this is your life?
Yeah. There was another family in our church who were foster parents. And so that was the only introduction that I had ever had to foster care. And they fostered teenagers, specifically teenage boys. And so they had a lot of kind of drama in their life sometimes. And that was really the only exposure I'd ever had to foster parenting. I think that adolescence in general is a really hard time for kids, right?
Yes.
And the task of adolescence is identity development. And so to have something major happen in your life that shifts your roles. I was a primary caregiver for my little brothers due to my mom's mental health struggles. And so just to have all the things that I had been responsible for and kind of built my identity around yanked from me at this pivotal age, it kind of set me into a true tailspin in a way that I'm not sure my teenage years would have looked like they did had I not entered foster care when I did.
Sure. That's completely understandable. And you talk a lot about loss, right? And that you experience tremendous loss. Can you help us understand? I mean, people might naturally think, okay, we see clearly you lost your time with your brothers. You lost not being in care, but what else? What are some things maybe we wouldn't even think about?
Yeah, and I'm glad you asked this question because I think it's such an important piece of helping our children heal is acknowledging the losses that they have experienced. And it's not just tangible losses, although those are numerous. Like I said, I didn't get to bring anything with me. So my entire life up until that point stayed in that bedroom, and I've never seen those things again. Which sometimes, we'll have a child come into our home who is really particular about people not touching their things or accumulating things. And part of that comes from that loss of, well, I had these things that were important to me and I don't have them anymore. And I don't have them to pass on to my children one day. Sometimes we take things like that for granted. As people that haven't been, impacted by foster care personally. There's also the loss of what should have been. And so I think one of the things that I quickly realized once I was in foster homes was what I didn't have and what I had never had in a lot of ways when it came to a mom and a dad and healthy in those roles. And so there's a loss of what should have been. Yeah. And that's a loss that we grieve through our lifespan. There were parts of my story I didn't grieve until my children reached the age. My firstborn son, when he was 12, it really struck me how little a 12-year-old is, right? I didn't feel little when I was 12.
I'm sure.
And I hadn't been treated like I was little for a long time, but 12-year-olds are still babies.
Yes.
And I never realized that until I was parenting a 12-year-old. So that grief stays with us through our lifespan.
Wow. Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. And even, would you say the loss, I think this relates to the loss of what should have been, but the loss of what you never knew, or I guess that would probably be the same thing, kind of what you're talking about. I mean, I have experienced that with some of our kids who didn't necessarily have real memories of their birth parents. They grieve that loss, right?
Right.
Sometimes it's easy to think if a child comes to you as a baby, there's no trauma. And that's just not the case.
Yeah.
One, physically, they can actually feel the impact of trauma of their mom carrying them, but also, the loss of what should have been. I think that is so important to hear.
Yeah.
How do you help our kids with that loss? Like, how do you bring it up? Do you wait till they say, because they may not even recognize, like you mentioned yourself, you didn't necessarily know that was a loss until you were older.
It's about creating an environment where kids feel safe to talk about their feelings. It will come up, right? But only if it feels safe for it to come up. If they don't have to worry about hurting your feelings by bringing it up, or they don't have to worry about how they're going to be viewed for having these conflicting feelings. Because sometimes we miss our mom, but we're also angry at our mom. And that doesn't make sense to our brain. And so we're afraid to say it out loud as kids. And so I think it's important just that we create and cultivate an environment where kids feel safe to say however they feel and just to validate them and meet them in that moment. All we need in that moment is that must have been really hard for you. I'm sorry that you didn't get to experience that. It makes my heart sad for you. That's really all they need, is just to be seen and heard in that moment.
What would be some things that maybe feel more natural for a parent to say who isn't thinking along the lines of what you just shared? Like on the negative side, a way that would like kind of shut them down. Oh, well, you don't have to worry about that now. Things like that. I'm your mommy now. Everything's going to be okay. Right. When we kind of say things that because we want them to move on past the uncomfortable, sad moment, then we're shutting down their feelings. And at the same time, we're also making them feel like maybe they shouldn't feel them. Wow. And that just causes them to get suppressed. And our bodies and our brains are like trash cans. Like we can suppress things for so long and stuff them down and maybe even jump on the trash so that we can close the lid. But eventually it reaches a capacity. And when trash spills out, it's ugly and messy. And so if we don't allow for that suppression all of the time, and we can just take it out one little piece at a time and have it be seen and let it go, then our kids are in a much healthier place. So good. I think that hit me that what you said there was not something an unloving parent would say. Like that would be said out of love, out of a desire to fix, or maybe out of uncomfortability, but not out of like, shut up, I don't want to hear it. It's not like that dramatic difference. I just think that's really important. It's really those things like, it's okay, all is well now, because the reality is it isn't all well. Right. There's brokenness. Feeling the way they feel. Right. Yeah. Let's kind of go back to your story, Melissa. Can you talk about what it was like that first night in that group home? And
the first night in the group home, the girl in the bunk above me set her bed on fire.
Welcome.
Very dramatic entrance into the foster care system. They quickly realized that I was not in the best fit for me. And I was moved to a foster family rather quickly after that. Okay. But yeah, that was terrifying and just so disoriented. I was already disoriented. I was already confused. And that just definitely added to the trauma of the night. Wow. When did they find out immediately? I mean, is that something, alarms went off, or are you running to find somebody? Thankfully it was dealt with really quickly and effectively and efficiently, but it definitely is something I vividly remember. So then you're moved now. Talk about what it feels like in your mind and in your brain as you are being driven to a stranger's house. I know that this is where my deep need for control came from, because you just felt so completely vulnerable and out of control. Like I had zero control over what was happening to me in those moments. I wasn't even being informed about what was happening to me. It was just being picked up and taken to the next place. There was very little conversation and I would ask questions like, where are my brothers? Where's my mom? And was just, those questions were just very brushed aside and given, very curt, pat answers that didn't give me any information that I was asking for. And so I just remember that time feeling very disorienting and out of control. And as you're going, are you being moved out of your school district? I guess you were at home, you were homeschooled, but you said during this time you had been at school. I had been in a private school, and thankfully both sets of the foster parents I had at the time did continue to transport me to that school. So I got to keep that sense of normalcy for myself. But everything else had changed.
Yeah. And when you enter this home, were these foster parents kind, warm? Was it more just like, here's your room? Like,
the first foster family was very much just like, here's your room. Here's, the expectations. It was very formal, and that felt strange.
Yeah.
But I wasn't there for too terribly long before I went to a true family, what I envision as a family. And that foster mom, looking back, I did not see this at the time, but looking back, really was intentional about the way that she poured into my life and managed my behavior and all of those things.
Mm-hmm. Wow. When you think about all that was going on in your head, you're starting to try to grab for control. And when you mention your behaviors, what did that look like coming out?
I was quite disrespectful. I isolated myself in my room. I didn't want to come out and eat with them. I didn't want to engage with their family. They weren't my family, so I didn't want to engage with them.
Yeah.
I ran away a good bit. I say that kids aren't running away from something, they're running to something. And I just wanted to find my brothers. I just wanted to make sure my mom was okay. Wow. And every time that I did run away, it wasn't out of rebellion or anger or anything. I was always running to accomplish something. Never truly did accomplish those things, but that's what was in my head at the time. I have to take this into my own hands. I have to figure this out. Even if I'm on my own, these people aren't telling me what I need to know anyway. I just have to go fix this.
Yeah.
Because I felt responsible for what had happened to my family.
And I was going to ask about that. You felt responsible. Did shame, did guilt, all of that come in quickly?
Yes. And it was perpetuated by the adults in my life. Sure. My parents blamed me and were very vocal about that at the time. And so I just ate that shame and definitely accepted it for myself and felt completely responsible for what had happened to our family.
So not only are you wearing the whole trauma and the experience and the disorientation of being removed suddenly and into new places away from your family, you're also being buried by shame.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And feeling this panicked feeling of, I have to rectify this. I have to fix this. Which obviously there wasn't anything I could do to fix it.
When did you start to kind of recognize that shame was not yours to wear, that it was not your fault? Healing, when did that start? How did that start?
Years and years later. I went to therapy as an adult for the first time when I was 30.
Okay.
And that's when I really began to unpack all these beliefs I had about myself. That really were rooted in my childhood. And that's the thing, children get removed for this one snapshot of a moment in time that, Child Protective Services is aware of. But very rarely is that the only thing that occurred to that child in their life, right?
Sure.
And I know for a lot of the placements that we had, we would be told they were removed for one thing, but then discover all these things. And so just because you're not removed until you're 12 doesn't mean that there wasn't this lifetime of trauma leading up to that point.
Right.
And all of those things had also contributed to the shame that I carried.
Yeah. Wow, that's heavy. I think as I was getting ready for this interview, I remember reading or seeing something from you about the role of grief, that you didn't necessarily even grieve some of the stuff or even know you had things to grieve. Is that accurate? Or talk about grief and the role it plays in your healing and in healing in general.
Yeah. I think that we don't realize that the losses that children feel and experience through foster care cause real feelings of grief. And grief is a process, right? And I don't like to call them stages of grief because I think we bounce all over the place in them, but all those different phases of grief. And so one of them is anger. And I now realize, looking back, that my adolescence was fueled by those first two phases of grief, denial and anger. And I got very stuck there for a very long time.
And then when did you start to see, was it not till your 30s when you went to therapy to realize that there's more to this story, or that I need to move forward?
That my anger was protecting me from having to feel the hurt and the pain and the grief.
Right. Wow. At this point, when you're 30, were you already married? Had you already?
I've been married since I was 18.
Oh, wow. We have similar, different stories, similar. I was 19 when I got married. So,
we just celebrated 25 years last July.
Wow, that's awesome. That's awesome. So I am wondering how that your childhood, your experiences played into your adulthood. I'm guessing there was some impact.
I just heard a little bit about this morning.
Okay.
Because definitely the way that I felt about myself showed up in my marriage very early on. And it was hard for me to accept love because I didn't believe I deserved it. I didn't believe I was worthy of it. I didn't view myself as lovable. And that resulted in, some of the push and pull behaviors that our kids have. Like, I had those in my early marriage, pushing him away, trying to see what do I have to do to get rid of this guy? Like, what will be his breaking point? And really just things that I had to let go of shame for some of the ways that I treated him in the beginning, just because love felt so scary to me.
Yeah. Because you knew it could be gone too, or it might not be real, or it's lost. Yeah. There's so much to that. So as you've continued to go through counseling at 30, what does the healing road look like?
It's very freeing once you begin to heal, because things start to make sense in a way that helps you let go of some of the shame and some of the self-blame and some of those types of things. And parenting helped me with that too. Like, would I have ever expected XYZ from my child? Would I have ever placed a burden like this on my child? And no, the answer was so often no. And that had helped even before therapy to start to open my eyes to, this wasn't me. This wasn't my fault. I didn't cause these things. Parents shouldn't do this or expect this or, and that helped, I think, start my healing journey.
Yes.
And also being open to starting to see my parents with compassion, which I was not capable of due to the way I had held on to anger and hatred. But when I was 30 was also the year that I reconciled with my father, who I hadn't spoken to in 13 years.
Wow.
And forgiveness is a huge part of healing. It truly is.
It's like you must release control in order to receive freedom, right? It's backwards. It feels backwards.
Yeah. And I had spent so many years tightly controlling absolutely everything I could. And that's exhausting.
Right. And so fearful, right? Because everything's a threat then.
Exactly. And so healing just became so freeing, because I was shedding weight every time I was able just to relinquish something. And my faith played a large role in that as well. Yeah.
I would love to hear more about this reconciliation with your dad. How did that come about?
So back in September 2008, which was a couple months before I turned 30, I had a pulmonary embolism. I was in the ICU. I almost lost my life. And the doctors kept coming in and saying, you shouldn't be here. And it started this kind of existential crisis that led me ultimately to my healing, because I was asking God those why questions. Why did you keep me here? What do you have for me to accomplish that I haven't accomplished yet? What is... And I found myself in Isaiah 58, which has become my life chapter. And as a recovering perfectionist, that was a very freeing chapter, because it's telling us how God is not looking for our acts of service. And God isn't looking for these things that we can check off the box to show that we're a good girl that I had been trying to do for so long.
Yeah.
But these were the things he was really looking for. To, loosen the chains of the oppressed and justice and all these things that have always resonated with me. And then verse 7 says, and to not turn your back on your own flesh and blood.
Whoa.
And I kept reading that verse and I kept arguing with God. Surely you don't mean allowing access to my life to my dad. He was a chaos creator. And when I had gotten pregnant at 16, that's when I had terminated my relationship with him. I wanted to control who had access to my child and who had the opportunity to hurt my child. And that was when I stopped talking to him. And so I was battling with God for a couple of months. Like, that can't possibly be what you're asking me to do. And it just clearly was. And funny part of the story, my dad lived in Florida at the time, and I got on a plane and I flew there, and I showed up on his doorstep unannounced. On the plane, I had written a 9-page letter of everything I hated him for. And I told God, okay, fine. If he will acknowledge everything on this letter, then I will forgive him. But I knew my dad, and I knew that he wasn't going to do that. And my brothers had tried to tell me that he had changed and grown. And I was like, I know he's not going to acknowledge these things. He never has. He never will. And he opened the door and I handed it to him and I said, I don't want to talk to you until you read this.
Wow.
And in the letter, it said, like, if you want a relationship with me, you have to acknowledge that these things happened. And took him a while to read it because it was pretty long. And he came back in, just tears streaming down his face. And he was like, I can't argue with a single thing there. And I'm so very sorry.
Wow. What a picture of redemption.
Yes. And if you could see me and my dad now, like, our relationship is such a gift to me. And it came at a time where I was getting ready to go through really hard things that I didn't know were coming. And he's been able to be there for me through those in a way that really healed very old wounded places in my heart, in just such a beautiful way for both of us.
Wow, that is so beautiful. That's incredible. And I just want to take it back to, you did have to let go of that. You chose to release control.
Yes. I had held on to the bitterness and the anger. I had recounted the injustices in my mind over and over and over again in order to keep fan the flames of the anger.
Right.
For 13 years. I used to say, I don't want to see him till he's dead. And then I'll just be confirming that for myself. I was just so bitter and hard-hearted and full of hate, which we don't realize is toxic.
Yeah. Right.
Toxic to our physical health. It's toxic to our mental health. And it's toxic to our spiritual health. Yeah.
Well, as I think about Isaiah 50, you were talking about Isaiah 55, right? 58, yes. 58. So the verses that have always been really important to me is just a little bit after that. Feed the hungry.
Yes.
I think it's 58, 10 through 12. And help those in trouble. Then your light will shine out from the darkness. Yes. Yeah. And the darkness.
Your healing will appear.
Yes. Right. And the darkness will be as bright as noon.
Yes.
I love the part where it says the Lord will guide you continually, giving you water when you are dry, restoring your strength.
Mm.
And then you will be like a well-watered garden and an ever-flowing spring.
Yes.
And it finishes with some of you will rebuild the deserted ruins of your cities, and then you will be known as a rebuilder of walls and a restorer of homes.
Yep.
And that is so what happened in your life.
Yes. That is my life chapter. God brought me to it and led me through it. And it has been such an incredibly redemptive experience. And, you know, the reason I share my story is because that type of redemption is only possible when there have been these periods of pain. Like redemption doesn't come from the easy.
Yeah.
It comes from the hard. And so, you know, sometimes when we can get stuck in feeling like a victim of the things that have happened in our life that we didn't have control over, there's something so empowering about the fact that all those verses in the Bible that says that God works everything together for good, they're true. We just have to allow him access.
Yeah. Wow. And just going back, I just keep going back to this. Allowing him access means we have to release control. We have to release our grip and open our hands and say, I trust you more than I trust me.
Yes, I call it living palms up. Here I am.
I love it.
And it's just a daily decision not to close my fingers. Like, I still battle it, even though I know full well how powerful God is when we allow him that access. There are still times, especially parenting children that are affected by trauma, where I just want to close my fingers and protect them and shield them, and knowing full well that really some of their healing will only take place if I let them fall.
Yes. I have experienced that as well, that sometimes in my desire to help and protect my child, I become that barrier between them and God.
Yeah.
And I just need to actually get out of the way so they can hear
and that
him.
Is definitely what it is like to parent young adults. You know, all of our kids are now grown except for one, and she will be leaving for college in August. Been parenting for 27 years. I'm about to not have any kids in the nest. I'm not going to know what to do with myself. But that is the hardest part, I think, of letting them launch is, you know, their brains aren't ready in a lot of ways when they've been affected by trauma, and just trusting God that he's got them when I'm not going to be there to cushion a fall, and I shouldn't be there to cushion a fall sometimes. That's been a hard lesson for me to learn.
Well, you're preaching to the choir. Yeah, I mean, we're right at our first one launched. Our oldest is 20. Our second one is launching this year, and we go down to an 11-year-old. So we're just in the thick of teenagers right now.
I remember those years well.
So, wow, man. I do want to talk before we close out, because I know that you also have had a complicated relationship with your biological mother. And yet prayer has made an impact on that relationship and on you. Can you talk to that?
Yeah. You know, there's a fine line between allowing God to redeem something and having healthy boundaries that protect your mental health and your mental well-being.
Yes.
And that's the fine line I have to walk in my relationship with my mom. She's not changed, and she's not healed. And so my relationship with her has looked different over the years based on where I'm at mentally and spiritually and where she is. We have reached a point in her life where her health is declining. And another one of those conversations I had with God, like, are you kidding me right now? Like, you want me to help take care of her? Really? And he's growing me through that process. He's growing and stretching me. And I'm thankful for it in a lot of ways, because I don't want to look back and have any regret at the end of her life either, of what could have been had I not been resistant to having this time with her. So I'm really trying to just enjoy the moments that are available to enjoy, and release the moments that are triggering or hurtful, or whatever the case may be.
Melissa, I feel like I could just ask you so many questions, but for sake of time, I would love just maybe as we close out for you to think about the child, maybe who's now an adult, and maybe actually still a child listening right now, who's gone through a lot of the same experiences you have. Would you just speak a word of encouragement, of hope to this person?
Yeah. I want you to know that God sees you. God sees your shame. He sees your regret. He sees your pain. And he sees a hope for you and a future for you, even when you can't. I want you to know that the things that you've done that you wish you hadn't done came from a place of pain, and God knows that. And he longs to heal that place in your heart so that you don't operate from that place of pain anymore. And I also want you to know that he is faithful to bring people into your life who will speak hope and truth if we let them. And that the only way to ever fully heal is to release some of the anger and bitterness we have towards others, even if that never looks like a restored relationship. Just getting it out of our heart and out of our mind and out of our soul is healing in itself.
Thank you, Melissa, so much. Thank you for listening. This podcast is made possible by Team 310, a group of people from all across the country who give monthly with the shared dream of seeing God throw open the floodgates of heaven so that every child, parent, and worker in foster care feels seen, understood, and cared for. To join Team 310 or learn more, head over to theforgotteninitiative.org/team310. That's theforgotteninitiative.org/team310. And remember, if you are someone passionate about supporting the foster care community, starting next month, applications to become a TFI advocate will be open. This opportunity only comes around twice a year, and there are limited spots available. So if you are interested in supporting your local foster care agencies and raising awareness of foster care within churches, then this is the perfect chance for you to get involved. The best part is that it is completely free, and our team will be there to assist you throughout the entire process. You can learn more and sign up to be notified when applications go live at tfiadvocate.org. All right, my friend, thank you for listening. I look forward to being back in this space together very soon.